There's a truth the world doesn't shout, but your soul already knows. Reality only mirrors what you've accepted as already true. Not what you wish for, not what you work for, but what you silently say yes to, even when no one is watching. That yes, it doesn't live in your mind. It lives in your inner atmosphere, and your life is shaped by it. For years, you may have tried, affirmed, pushed, waited. You asked, what else do I need to do? But the answer was never in doing. Neville Goddard said it clearly. Assumption, if persisted in, will harden into fact. He didn't speak of effort. He didn't ask for rituals. He spoke of acceptance, of the quiet choice to feel that it's already yours. The world does not respond to your hunger. It responds to your inner climate. It doesn't give you what you beg for. It reflects what you've already made peace with. And yet, there's a war inside. One part of you whispers, "It's done." The other part shouts, "But prove it." That inner tug of war is not weakness. It's the mind trying to protect what it knows and the heart inviting you into the unknown. The mind says, "Convince me." The heart says, "Just feel it." Most people get stuck in that space. They wait for evidence. They don't realize that belief births proof, not the other way around. Bruce Lipton confirmed it through science. Your subconscious is a program. It's not convinced by logic. It's reconditioned through repetition and feeling. When you accept a new identity, you imprint a new command. You change the neural loop of what's allowed, possible, expected. Your biology adjusts. Your emotions shift. And slowly, your life moves with it. But it starts from assumption, that inner decision that this is who you now are. Don't think of it as climbing a mountain to reach your goal. That's the old way. The new way is different. It's like choosing new coordinates in your GPS. You don't fight the terrain. You simply allow the world to rearrange around your new destination. No more striving, no more chasing, just accepting the inner state that already contains the outcome. Because it's never been about effort. It's always been about alignment. Let the silence speak now. Feel that subtle shift in your chest. That calm knowing that doesn't scream. The voice that says, you already are. You already have. That's the voice of assumption. And once you listen, reality listens too. The trap of wanting without accepting. Wanting is a subtle seduction. It feels like movement. It feels like power. But underneath it lives the vibration of lack. When you say, I want, what the universe hears is, I don't have. It's an invisible declaration of absence. And if you listen closely, you'll notice most of your wanting is rooted in fear, not creation, in delay, not presence. Desire is not the enemy. But when it isn't followed by acceptance, it becomes a loop that keeps you watching the door instead of living as if it's already open. That's why so many affirm with intensity, visualize with passion, and still feel stuck. Because inside they're still identifying as someone without. They pray for rain, while holding an umbrella of doubt. Think of the man who begged the universe for wealth. Every day he affirmed, imagined, tried to feel rich. But in every conversation, every decision, every glance at his bank account, he still wore the identity of broke but trying. He didn't accept abundance. He performed hope. And so, nothing changed. Because the universe doesn't respond to performance. It responds to vibration. And vibration is born from what you've already claimed as real. You don't manifest what you long for. You manifest what you've accepted as part of your self-image. It's not about begging for the light. It's about being the light. And that's where most get lost. They want, desperately, but they don't accept. And in that gap, their new life waits. Unseen, unheard, unfelt. There's nothing more magnetic than a quiet yes spoken in the soul. Not a loud wish, not a rehearsed mantra, but a calm certainty. This is mine, because this is me. Wanting pulls you into the future. Acceptance roots you in the now. And it's from the now that all realities begin to form. The fear of not being who you were. There is a secret most people never speak aloud. To accept a new reality, you must grieve the old version of yourself. And grief doesn't always feel like sadness. Sometimes it feels like hesitation, like procrastination, like a strange discomfort that creeps in the moment you begin to change. It's not resistance to success. It's resistance to no longer being who you were. The ego, that tender and protective part of you, fears disappearance. It clings to what's familiar, even if the familiar is pain, struggle, or scarcity. To the ego, identity equals safety, and when you assume a new reality, one where you are already free, already fulfilled, already worthy, you are, in a way, dissolving the self who learned to survive without those things. And that can feel like death. But it's not death, it's transformation. Bruce Lipton's work echoes this. Your biology responds to perception. Your cells are listening. When you begin to see yourself as the one who no longer needs fixing, who is no longer broken, the subconscious updates its blueprint. But first, the old script resists. It says, if I am not the struggler, then who am I? That is not failure. That is evolution. The spiritual journey doesn't just bring you closer to what you desire. It brings you face to face with the parts of you that never believed you were allowed to have it. And when you sense that fear, that friction, it's not a sign to stop. It's a sign that the old shell is cracking. Visualize yourself, not as someone chasing healing, but as someone who already embodies wholeness. Feel what it's like to no longer define yourself by the wounds, to walk into a room without needing to explain your journey, to feel peace, not because everything is solved, but because you've remembered. Nothing about you was ever truly broken. That's when assumption begins. Not in force, but in surrender. Not in action, but in identity. Not in fixing, but in finally allowing yourself to be. Sometimes the brightest words hide the deepest shadows. You've been told to stay positive, to think happy thoughts, to visualize the best. But there's a subtle danger in that advice. Because when you speak about what you want with forced enthusiasm, while deep down still feeling unworthy, you're not creating change, you're amplifying the split. Neuroscience has shown us this split in motion. When you declare a desire, your brain experiences a burst of dopamine, a short-lived thrill. But if that desire is not supported by your current identity, the reward system collapses. Your body feels the gap. The crash comes fast. And so you try again. More affirmations, more vision boards. But underneath, the old self remains untouched. The most powerful manifestation is not shouting light into the dark. It's sitting with the dark until it no longer defines you. Because when you use positive thinking to escape your pain, you don't transcend it, you postpone it. And postponed pain doesn't disappear, it embeds. And then you wonder why all your affirmations echo back as silence. There is a quieter path, one that doesn't demand that you be cheerful, but asks that you be honest. Not, I will be rich, but I am the kind of person who accepts abundance as normal. Not, I hope I heal, but I assume wholeness is my nature. This is the path of neutral acceptance. It doesn't shout, it doesn't sparkle, it whispers, I've already arrived. That's why journaling from identity, not from desire, is sacred. When you write as the person who already lives the life, your subconscious listens. You're no longer programming from lack. You're imprinting from alignment. Not pretending, not hoping, but being. And being is where the real power lives.
The illusion of earning desires. You were raised in a world that taught you this. To receive, you must earn. To deserve, you must prove. That everything beautiful must be paid for, either in effort, suffering, or time. And so, without realizing it, you began to wear your struggle like a badge of honor, as if pain were the price of worth, as if only through exhaustion could you reach the gates of abundance. But manifestation doesn't follow those rules.
The universe does not operate on the currency of toil. It responds to assumption. Neville Goddard said it with unwavering clarity. Your assumption, though false, if persisted in, will become fact. He did not say you must first be worthy. He did not say you must work harder than everyone else. He said you must accept. And yet something inside resists. Because if you didn't earn your desire, would you feel allowed to keep it? That is the quiet conditioning of this culture. The idea that ease is suspicious, that grace must be justified, and so you delay your manifestation, not because it isn't possible, but because deep down, you still believe you haven't done enough to deserve it. But what if desire wasn't a reward? What if it was a selection? A frequency you align with, like a song you choose on a radio. You don't have to fight to hear the music. You just tune in. In the field of infinite possibilities, you are not climbing a ladder. You are moving through doors. Doors that open the moment you identify with what's on the other side. The truth is simple and radical. You're not here to earn your desires. You're here to remember that they were always available. The path isn't about effort. It's about intimacy. Intimacy with the version of you who no longer argues with ease, who no longer questions their own arrival, and who finally understands that worth was never up for debate. Before we continue, pause with this thought. What if the only thing separating you from everything you've ever wanted is a truth you haven't fully accepted yet? If that speaks to something inside you, there's something waiting for you in the pinned comment. A reflection, a reminder, maybe even the key you've been overlooking. Now let's go further, because the real shift begins when you stop chasing and start embodying. You can repeat affirmations until your voice goes numb. You can script every morning, visualize every night, meditate between tasks. But if the one performing these techniques still sees themselves as broken, incomplete, or waiting to become, nothing will truly shift, because the subconscious isn't listening to what you're doing. It's responding to who you believe you are while doing it. Techniques are not magic. They are mirrors. They reflect the identity of the one using them. And if the identity remains wrapped in doubt, desperation, or lack, the technique becomes a ritual of spiritual anxiety. It may offer temporary relief, but it won't create lasting transformation. Because true change is not about what you do, it's about where you operate from. There was a woman who scripted her dream life daily. She wrote with detail, with emotion, with hope. But every night, she fell asleep feeling like she was chasing something outside of herself. Her words were beautiful, but her vibration was pleading. Because deep down she was still assuming she didn't have it. Her technique wasn't failing. Her identity was just untouched. The moment she shifted from scripting as a seeker to scripting as someone already living her vision, the energy changed. Not because she found a better method, but because she finally became the one the method was meant for. She no longer used the technique to get there. She used it as an expression of who she already was. That's the real turning point. When you no longer meditate to attract peace, but because peace is now your natural state. When you no longer visualize wealth to call it in, but because wealth is now part of your inner landscape. The technique doesn't lead to the identity. The identity breathes life into the technique. And once you assume that identity, not just once, but as a daily vibration, the world begins to follow. Quietly, inevitably, completely. There's a strange safety in the feeling of progress, in being almost there, in seeing signs, synchronicities, hints from the universe. It gives the illusion that something is happening, that manifestation is close. But there's a hidden trap inside that comfort, because if you're always almost, you never fully arrive. You stay in a loop of hope, rather than a state of embodiment. Why? Because becoming the version of you who already has what they once desired isn't just exciting, it's confronting. It demands the death of the old self who was always becoming, always fixing, always preparing. And for many, that death feels too final, too real. To fully accept the wish fulfilled means letting go of the story of the one who was still trying. But you weren't born to live in almost. You weren't meant to orbit your dreams indefinitely. The ego loves the journey because it delays arrival. It avoids the weight of identity. Because when you are the thing you once longed for, you can no longer use the excuse of waiting. You can no longer rely on the comfort of trying. You must be. And yet, there's a beauty on the other side of that discomfort. A quiet certainty. A stillness that says, I no longer seek because I already am. It's not loud. It's not boastful. It doesn't need external validation. It simply radiates. Because the moment you replace almost with already, something ancient within you relaxes. The fight dissolves. The need to prove disappears. You start choosing differently, speaking differently, moving with a calm authority that doesn't need permission. Because you've stopped negotiating with your desire. You've stopped delaying the manifestation with hopeful doubt. You've said yes, fully, silently, completely. And that shift, so subtle, so sacred, is what makes the universe move. Not urgency, not striving, but the magnetic power of someone who has already arrived. Your identity is the root command. There is an invisible voice that speaks louder than your words, louder than your actions. It lives beneath your thoughts, beneath your effort. It is the identity you've accepted as yours. That silent declaration, "This is who I am," writes the very code your subconscious lives by. You don't attract what you think. You attract what you've accepted as true about yourself. Bruce Lipton calls this the biology of belief. Not just an idea, but a physiological truth. The body responds to perception. Your cells obey the signal you send with your assumptions. If you wake up and assume struggle, your nervous system prepares for it. If you assume joy, your brain releases the chemistry of peace. Identity isn't abstract. It's chemical, it's cellular, it's law. That's why the question isn't, what do I want today? The question is, who do I assume I am today? Because that assumption becomes the root command, the foundation upon which all thoughts, emotions, and actions are built. It is the operating system of your vibration. And once it's set, your life doesn't ask for permission. It begins to reflect. You've tried forcing change through willpower. You've tried chasing alignment through strategy. But true transformation happens when you shift the assumed self, the one behind the scenes, the one writing the script. And it starts small. It starts in moments no one else sees, when you choose to carry yourself as someone who already lives the truth they once begged for. When you walk into your day as the version of you who already belongs, already creates, already holds the life they imagined, the world shifts in response. Not because you manipulated it, but because you've stopped contradicting it. You've stopped acting like a visitor in the reality you were born to command. And instead, you've returned to the origin, the self that never needed to prove anything, only to accept everything as already real, as already you. The cost of assumption is the death of doubt. To assume is not to wish. It is not to hope. It is to close the door on every other possibility. And that, though liberating, is also terrifying. Because the moment you fully assume your desire as real, something within you must die. And that something is doubt. Doubt has a strange comfort. It gives you an exit, a loophole, a cushion in case things don't unfold the way you imagined. It lets you say, maybe it wasn't meant for me. But assumption removes that cushion. It leaves no back door. It is the energetic equivalent of boarding a plane with no return ticket. Once you take your seat, the old land becomes unreachable. And that's why so few truly assume. Because they're not just afraid of failure. They're afraid of no longer having the identity they built around the waiting, around the longing, around the someday. Assumption demands closure. It demands the burial of the old story. Not with resentment, but with reverence. There is a sacredness in letting go of the version of you who didn't know, who doubted, who questioned their power. And sometimes that departure needs to be ritualized. A letter written and burned. A journal page closed with finality. A whisper to the wind. Thank you for protecting me, but I don't need you anymore. Because when you assume, truly assume, something clicks in your nervous system. A new path activates. Not through struggle, but through surrender. Not through chasing, but through choosing. You become unreachable to the old frequency. Untouchable by the echo of your past beliefs. And in that clarity, the world doesn't just change. It reveals what was always waiting behind the veil of hesitation. A reality aligned with who you've now become. Certain, silent, whole. There's a subtle addiction most don't recognize. An emotional attachment to effort, to struggle, to proving. It's been woven so deeply into the collective psyche that many believe they must earn their desires with visible sacrifice. You are taught to equate effort with value. That the more you suffer, the more you deserve. That the reward must be justified by the climb. And so, without realizing it, you learned to fear ease. Assumption, in contrast, asks nothing of you except your full internal surrender. It asks you to feel that it's already done without needing to explain why. To move in the world as if the thing you've longed for has already been chosen, already been accepted, already been absorbed into your self-image. But the ego trembles at that invitation, because it leaves no space for struggle stories, no evidence of hard-won battles, no outward justification for the blessings received. This is where so many feel the tension. They meditate, visualize, script, and affirm, not just to manifest, but to prove to themselves and to others that they're doing the work. And while these practices are beautiful when rooted in identity, they often become rituals of resistance when used to fill the silence where assumption should live. Effort is visible. It earns praise. Look how hard you're trying, they say. And that feedback loop conditions the subconscious to seek approval through striving. But assumption Assumption is quiet, invisible, undeniable only in its results. It asks you to sit in the frequency of already having, and that kind of ease is so foreign, so confronting, that many unconsciously reject it before it has a chance to take root. Imagine a man who has always struggled with money. Every financial win is tied to exhaustion. Every bill paid feels like a battle survived. He begins to learn about assumption. He hears that wealth is a frequency, not a reward, that he can simply align with the version of him who already lives in overflow, and something in him sparks. But then, doubt creeps in. If it's that easy, what about all the years I've fought? If I just assume I'm wealthy now, doesn't that erase all the suffering? Doesn't that make it unfair? He doesn't say these words aloud, but they echo in his nervous system, in the choices he makes, in the energy he holds. And without knowing it, he resists the assumption, not because it isn't true, but because it challenges the foundation of his worth. He's been taught that value comes from effort, so to receive with ease feels dangerous, unfamiliar, even shameful. And yet, assumption doesn't erase your journey. It honors it. It says, you've suffered enough, now choose. Not with force, not with fear, but with calm certainty. Assumption is not arrogance. It's not entitlement. It's alignment. It's the deep knowing that your frequency, not your fight, is what determines what stays in your life. Neville Goddard was clear. The outer world reflects the inner state, not the number of hours worked, not the length of your affirmations, but the identity you've accepted. When you continue to strive while secretly feeling unworthy, you are rehearsing the same loop. The technique may change, the belief does not, and so, the reality remains stuck. Effort gives the illusion of progress. It's why people feel safer trying than arriving, because trying postpones the confrontation with the self. It keeps you in motion without demanding transformation. But when you assume, fully, deeply, irreversibly, you cross a threshold. You stop asking for permission. You stop seeking proof. You simply are. And that's the place most people resist, because assumption demands that you abandon the identity of the struggler, of the seeker, of the one who's almost there. And that identity, even if painful, has become familiar, comforting, like worn clothes that no longer fit, but still feel like home. To step into the new identity means letting go, not just of doubt, but of the need to earn your way into joy. That doesn't mean effort is wrong. It means the vibration behind the effort matters more than the action itself. When you act from the state of already being, the action becomes an extension of embodiment. When you act to try to become, it becomes a performance. The difference is everything. You are not here to convince the universe. You are here to remember who you already are, to walk in the stillness of that knowing, to choose from the place of completion, not from the illusion of lack. And if that feels confronting, let it, because confrontation is the threshold of your next becoming. You can still move, still build, still create, but let it flow from the assumption, not toward it. Let your life become a mirror of your identity, not a substitute for it. You do not need to suffer to be chosen. You do not need to struggle to be worthy. You only need to say yes to the frequency that matches the truth of your being. Assumption does not require permission. It does not wait for applause. It simply moves as if it's already done. And that quiet movement, that inner stillness, is the greatest force of manifestation you will ever know. Real manifestation feels like a quiet knowing, not a firework. There's a belief deeply embedded in the modern spiritual landscape that manifestation must arrive with spectacle, that it should come with signs in the sky, sudden opportunities, or a surge of overwhelming emotion that confirms you've done it. Many wait for the grand moment, a firework of realization, a divine applause that finally says, "You've made it." But in truth, the deepest manifestations, the ones that shift your reality at the root, don't come with noise. They come with silence, with stillness, with a quiet, undeniable knowing. That knowing doesn't shout, it doesn't flash, it doesn't demand to be seen. It settles. It anchors itself in your chest like a breath you didn't know you were holding. And suddenly, you're different. Not because the external world has changed yet, but because the internal war is over. The need to search, to prove, to monitor every thought, to wait for the perfect sign, it all fades. And what remains is peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from escaping pain, but the kind of peace that comes from returning home. Neville Goddard spoke of assumption not as a spark, but as a foundation. An assumption, though false if persisted in, will harden into fact. He never described it as dramatic. He didn't say it would make your skin tingle or bring tears to your eyes. He spoke in terms of inevitability, as something that becomes so real within you that the external must obey. And what's powerful about this is not the force, it's the stillness. It's the naturalness of it, as if it could not be any other way. But many miss this, because they're addicted to intensity, to the emotional high of rituals, the anticipation of something big, the chase for synchronicities. They mistake temporary emotional spikes for transformation. They confuse stimulation with embodiment. And so when the quiet knowing comes, when the identity truly shifts, they sometimes overlook it, because it doesn't feel like a performance. It feels like completion, and completion is calm. It's like closing a door and no longer wondering if it was the right one, like locking into a radio frequency and suddenly hearing the music clearly, not because the song changed, but because you stopped tuning away. There's no drama, no celebration, just alignment. And alignment is not exciting in the way the mind craves. It's satisfying in the way the soul remembers. Think about the moment you truly forgave someone. Not when you said the words, not when you tried to feel compassionate, but when, one day, their name no longer triggered pain. That's real transformation. It doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself in your absence of resistance, in your new default. That's what manifestation feels like when it's real, when it's integrated, when it's assumed. You wake up and you don't need to rehearse being rich, loved, or healed. You simply feel like yourself. And that self is already those things. You walk into your day without needing signs because you no longer question your path. You stop scanning your reality for proof because your inner climate no longer requires it. You don't get excited when something happens that looks like your manifestation because deep down, you already expect it. It's not a surprise. It's a match. This is the mark of someone who has truly assumed. They don't chase their future. They embody it. They don't force outcomes. They invite them by existing in a state that already reflects the end. They no longer oscillate between belief and doubt because they no longer frame manifestation as something to achieve. It's something they've already become. And this is where so many turn away, right before the threshold, because the absence of fireworks feels anticlimactic. They wonder, shouldn't I feel more? Shouldn't there be a sign? Shouldn't I cry, shake, or feel overwhelmed? But the soul doesn't need spectacle. The soul needs truth. And truth, when it lands, does not knock you over. It sits beside you like an old friend saying, "It's done." Bruce Lipton's work on perception and biology confirms this. When you change your internal belief, your body, your chemistry, adjusts. Your cells behave as if the new reality is already in motion. And yet there's no explosion. There's just coherence, harmony, a quiet command that says, "This is who I am now," and the entire system falls into place. So if you're waiting for the moment when it all clicks, listen closer. It may have already arrived. That stillness you've been feeling lately, the absence of urgency, the soft detachment from old fears, it's not a pause. It's the new vibration settling in. You've moved into it, and now life is recalibrating around your new signal. You may not feel euphoric. You may not even feel much at all. But you'll notice your choices shift. You'll notice you respond differently to the same old triggers. You'll find yourself making decisions that only your future self would make. And that's the sign. Not a firework, but a pattern of quiet power emerging from within. The real miracle isn't that something changes outside. It's that something stabilizes inside. And once it does, the world no longer needs to prove itself to you. Because the proof is in your posture, your vibration, your eyes. And that is the greatest confirmation you'll ever receive. Not a flash, not a thrill, just a deep, sacred, unshakable knowing. Reality bows to what you've already accepted. There's a point where you stop asking and start knowing, where the need for signs dissolves and silence becomes confirmation. Neville Goddard said, "Consciousness is the only reality. What you accept as true becomes law, not by force but by resonance." Bruce Lipton affirms this biologically. Change your perception and your entire system responds. Manifestation doesn't require effort. It requires identity. You don't attract through wanting. You align through being. Like tuning into a frequency, the moment you embody the vibration, the signal is clear. You no longer try to become. You remember you already are. In that remembering, something shifts. Not loudly, but fully. You stop chasing and start living. You stop hoping and start embodying. Reality has no choice but to reflect what you've finally accepted. It is done, not because you pushed for it, but because you've become the one who no longer doubts, only receives. Now, before you go, check the pinned comment. It's not there by accident.